we go.
Thank you. Now I'm going to start sharing. Let's do this quickly. That didn't work. Let's try it again. There it goes. Share sound. Sure. Okay. Let's bring it up as a slideshow. I have to talk myself through it so I don't muck it up. There. Can everybody see it? Okay, good. So we can move right down to the third slide. If there's anybody that's come on just in the last couple minutes, I shared that I put out on the toolbox 3 forms that I'd like you to take time to look at this week if you have time. And then if there's anything between what we're talking about tonight and on those forms that you want to talk about or just want to comment about, please just email me and we can do an email discussion, or I can join you on a Zoom talk and we can talk about them. So tonight is about pastoral care journeys. And remember last week I told you we were going to talk about the journeys of death, grief, and loss, of aging, and that's self-care. And if you were to put pastoral care visits into a ball and shake them around, those are the ones that you will almost always see, because with death, grief, loss, aging goes loneliness, goes hardships, whether it's financial or home, or so there's sort of the major journeys that you will be walking with people on. So let's talk about loss. It's necessary. We're never going to avoid loss. It's actual, yet it's also perceived. What I think is a loss may not feel like a loss to somebody else. Maturational, depending on your age, and situational, depending on where you are in your life, in your parish, in your job. But they're all part of our life. They're not going to go away. They're not going to get better as we get older, and they're actually going to get worse, especially as you see your friends getting ill, ending up in nursing homes, dying, being diagnosed with cancer. So loss is a part of all of our lives. And grief is that emotional response to loss. It doesn't just mean that you grieve a death. You can grieve a marriage. You can grieve a child leaving for college or getting married and going off on her own. There's all sorts of loss, and there's all sorts of grief that goes with that loss. And it is unique and individualized. No one can tell anybody else how to deal with their grief. We can give them ideas. We can give them suggestions. We can give them references or books or things to do, but it is an individual process, just as pain is individual. Somebody may have a toothache and it's shattering to them. They just can't stand it. And that another person may have the same type of toothache with the same type of pain, but their perception of that pain is different. So it's based on our personal experiences, our cultural expectations, our spiritual beliefs, how we grieve and how we respond to loss. So the first, we're going to talk about death and dying. And in the 3 things I put on the toolbox for you, I was hoping we would have time to do it as an exercise as a whole, where I could give you 15 minutes and you could do this, but I wasn't sure I could spare 15 minutes. But I want you to write your own obituary, because as we start thinking about death and dying, you need to come to terms with how you feel about your own death and your own mortality, because it's very, very important for you to understand how you feel in order to deal with how somebody else is feeling. And when I went through end of life training to become an end of life doula, we went through this exercise, and there were many of us that cried through probably a quarter of a day, because we were talking about experiencing our own death, our own illness that takes us to that edge. And it's difficult. It's really difficult. And this exercise is really kind of interesting. It's a template, and it'll ask you questions, and you have to answer the questions. And I am hoping that you will take the time to do that. Do it when you're fresh and when you maybe out on the porch in the sun, and really let your heart and your mind and your spirituality sort of just be, and write it and see where you come. What does it make you feel like? How do you feel about your own mortality? Because there's so many things that go into our fears of dying and death. And if we understand them, then we can help somebody else understand them as well. There's a process to death and dying. Oops, where did I forget something on that screen? Must be, my apologies. First, I know why, because first we're going to talk about grief, death, and loss. It's conversion and hospitality. What does that mean? It's a continuous process of life. And letting go means you're grieving. When you let go of that loss, when you look at your husband in the casket, when you hear that your ex-boyfriend has committed suicide, even though you're not with him anymore, when you hear of that loss, then you immediately start to grieve. And without acknowledging that loss as part of a conversion, you're not denying that God makes something new, because death is converting us from this life here on earth to our heavenly life, our afterlife. So it's, we're really good about thinking about birth and how exciting it is and how it's so romantic. Birth is romantic. The 2 people that are in the room when that baby is being born, and the looks on their eyes, and the first cry of that newborn baby, that's death. Only we're looking in, that person who has passed away is looking in the eyes of Jesus. His newness is not cold, we hope, and not stark like a newborn baby feels, but it's a conversion. It's a conversion from life to a new life. It's also about hospitality. When we're with somebody, we want them to understand about that conversion, but we also want to be there for the hospitality. We want to show them that we are there to comfort and to be a presence. That grief can be overwhelming for all of us, not just for those who are going through it or the person that's sitting next to you. But even as you hear and talk about someone else's grief, you might find that you tear up, and you might feel that grief in your heart as well. So what we want to say to them is, I am here with you. I am here with you in your grief, in your time of grief. Not I am here for you. Because for you implies that you're going to help them with that, get through that grief. And they need to work through their grief on their own. We can help a little bit, We can help by listening. We can be there with them. We can touch their hand. We can listen to their stories. We can dry their tears. We can hug them. But we can't fix their problem. We can't take their grief away from them. It's a normal reaction to all losses in life. And we talked about some of them, the death of a loved one. I don't know if the loss of a pregnancy. I don't know if anybody has heard of the rainbow babies. Yes or no? Our young people today, my granddaughter is one of them, when they have a miscarriage, the baby that is born after a miscarriage and lives is called a rainbow baby. And they remember the day of that baby's, that would be child's birth. And they do all these little things. And I had 6 pregnancies and only 2 babies were born out of those 6 pregnancies. And I remember that grief, but I also remember everybody telling me, you're young, you can have another one. You know, it's not a big deal. I wished I would have been able to grieve those pregnancies that I lost, especially the one that I lost at 5 months. But back then we didn't let that happen. We were told, yeah, no, come on, you need to buck up, pick yourself up by your bootstraps. And now young people are saying, well, wait a minute, that was going to be my child, my son, my daughter, and I deserve to grieve, and I deserve to remember that baby. So it's a normal reaction, and everybody has different reactions to them. It's also a process that continues to develop. How many times have you told somebody it will get easier? Yeah, it may, but it's going to be maybe a long time before it gets easier. Or, you know, I'll give you an idea. My grandson, who will be 21 in September, was dating a beautiful young lady for a year, and she had to go back to California. And they sort of separated. She found another boyfriend. My grandson did not. And last May, he got a phone call that she had committed suicide. And he is still grieving the loss of his first love, this beautiful young girl, that he found himself a place in her heart. And his mom keeps saying, Jake, you got to get over her. You know, just get over her. There's other girls in the world. You know, there will be other girls in the world, and he will find that other girl, because I know that God's looking out for him, but he's not ready. He has to do his own grieving. And when the first year rolled around a couple weeks ago in May, it was the beginning of May, he took the day off and he went into the mountains of West Virginia all alone and stood on top of the mountaintop and saw beauty around him and came home a different young man, still grieving, not completely over it, but better, but a little better. So it's something that develops, it comes and goes. However we live spiritually, socially, psychologically, or physically is how we walk through grief. So don't ever tell anybody, it'll be okay, it will get better, you'll get over it. Just be with them. Tell them, you know, it's hard. I know how hard this must be for you to lose somebody that you love so much, you know, and it will be all right. And there's a question. Let me look real quick. Oh, no. Laura's telling me that the toolkit's open.
Cecily has a comment or something to add to this section.
Cecily, you do?
Yes,
okay.
I do. Because where you're talking about loss of pregnancy, there's another section that no one ever discusses, and that is women who have gotten to that age where they would have or would have been pregnant and were not able to be pregnant, not able to conceive, and people. There's nothing. There are no groups for them to attend. There's nothing, and for those women, that's a major loss for them not to be able to have had a child. And people look at them and act like, well, well, God has something else in mind for you, or there are other children, oh, well, you're a mother to, to other children, and that sort of thing. And that doesn't wash, that doesn't get it. You don't have one of your own. And then when you hear people who have just thrown away babies, and you just look at it and think, well, why is it that here are other people that if you look at them, they can become pregnant? And then you look at other people who just throw children away as trash. And then here is a person who absolutely wanted one in so many ways, and then and would love a child to death. And then here are others who just didn't seem to want to be mothers. And these are just, that is, you just, it's a major grief. And,
Absolutely.
and
Thank you.
no one gets it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Safi. Safi? Sassy.
Cecily.
I practiced it before I came on tonight. I actually practiced it, and my apologies. But you're right. And there are so many losses that we don't even count as losses in our lives, because people my age, I think, sometimes figure that's just part of growing up. And so you're right. We need to be very considerate of what is a loss to some people. Thanks, Cecily. I appreciate that. Grief has a purpose. It gets beyond reactions to loss. It helps you adapt to loss. It helps you live through it so you can live fully. And it requires a lot of courage to face that unfamiliar and really, really painful feeling that loss brings, whatever the loss is. And it's also overwhelming for the care receiver to talk about grief. And they feel like that there's rejection in their grief. I know that in our group right now, there are probably, each one of you has had a loss that has shattered your world for whatever reason. And I know that you wondered if it was ever going to get better, but we know it did get better. And we use those things that helped us get better when we're sharing that and listening with an empathetic heart to those who are grieving. I think it's so important that we have to be there. We have to be that presence. And there's things that I don't have on the slides, but from the End of Life doula program, oh, look, I spelled grief wrong too. Sorry about that. The End of Life doula does that. People want to know that they did well in their life. And they want to know that that person that died will be remembered, not just by them, but other people, by other family members that knew him, by the church that he went to. And so they face so much. Grief is such a big word for only being 5 letters. It's a physical process. And men don't like to cry, or many men don't like to cry. I can remember saying to my husband when he was a young man and he cried one time, "Don't cry. I don't like it when you cry." And then, so we grew together. I thought, why did I say that to him? He's a human being. He can cry. But it causes loss of appetite, sleeplessness, depression. It's just from physiological, social, spiritual, the process runs the gamut of all of those parts of your life. And it's hard. It's really hard to process through that. There are 3 stages of grief. Shock. And the experts say that shock usually lasts 2 to 10 days. That first, you get that phone call or the police come to your door and you have lost somebody. And that immediate shock just is like a blast of frozen air in your face. However, I also believe that God gives us this protective wind around us, because most people can walk through that shock and do what they have to do and not remember that they did what they had to do or how they possibly could have done that. The next one is disorganization, and it can last 2 to 3 years, where they're guilty, they feel guilt, they're angry, they're despairing, they're lonely, they're depressed. the list could go on. And then reorganization, or the withdrawal of the emotional energy, focusing on the loss and moving on into the present life. What is there now for me? So 2 to 3 years. So if you were ever in a state of shock or grief, I'm sorry, if you're ever in a state of grief, and 2 years down the road, you still could cry over it. That's just kind of part of the process of grief and how certain people go through it. Then there's sorry. Hold on. I'm not having a very good time tonight with my button. You did that one. There's 4 tasks of grief. Sorry, my rolly finger's too fast tonight. That's accepting that reality intellectually and emotionally. That's why we have funerals. That's why we have rituals. That's why family gathers around and you get all this food and the neighbors come. Then you have to work through that pain. And that's where we, as pastoral caregivers, can really help. That's where we can help them by listening to what's going on with them, by hearing what they're saying, by hearing the stories they're sharing with us, by smiling with them when they remember something that's so precious to them, and shedding a tear with them when the grief just overcomes them again. Then they have the third task of why and what does this mean? Now, what do I do? What does this mean for me? And the third task can be really, really difficult, because if it's a wife that's lost a husband, or even vice versa, there may be some really tough financial decisions. They may be in a big house. I have a dear friend who lost her husband a year ago, and they still live in the house that they raised their whole family in. And, she's been left to clean it out and decide how she can sell it and how she's going to move on. The third task is a hard task. It's kind of daunting. And then the fourth task is emotionally moving on, getting on with your life in a new way and with new things happening. There's also, as we know, 5 stages of grief, or it's also called 5 stages of death and dying. You've all heard them. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is noted for her work in death and dying, and it holds true today. As many times as a palliative care chaplain, I've been around patients that are hearing that that they have an incurable, untreatable disease, knowing that they're in the process of dying, or actively dying patients, and they go through this. The first is that denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. They're all there. They're all stages that they go through in some form or another. So if we're looking at grief and 5 stages of grief, how can we help? What interventions are available to us as pastoral caregivers? Well, we don't want to deny them support from us. We want our conversations to include really reality, and we are going to encourage self-care activities. We are not, even though we are in our heart and mind going to be a bit sympathetic, we're going to be empathetic, because we want them to heal on their own, and we want to be that vehicle to help them to get there. And the best way is to be with them, listen to them, encourage self-care activities, encourage activities about reality. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't even know how I'm going to pay the bills. Well, what bills are due today? Do you have bills due today? What would they be? What is the situation? Let them talk about it. It's hard, but let them talk about it. Give them space for their anger. And I have been shoved out of the way by an angry spouse. I have been treated unkindly because I've been told I don't understand. And you have to just say, you just have to stay, sit there and shake your head and say, I'm so, so sorry that you're having to go through this. One time I said to a very, very angry wife, I wished I had a magic wand so I could just take it all away, but I cannot do that. And you have every right to be angry. And I want you to be angry at me. Don't be angry at your daughter or your son. Don't take it out on them. Let's go into another room and you be angry to me. It worked. We went into a consultation room. We talked. She screamed. She called me names. She did whatever she had to do. But the end result is she was trying to get through the anger she was feeling that God took that person that she so loved. Bargaining. You know, God, I'll do anything if you don't take him. Please don't take. When our grandson was born 19 years ago, he was very ill. We finally got him home, and he had a cardiac arrest in my arms like an hour after we got him home from John Hopkins. And as the ambulance was coming, I'm praying, God, don't take him. Please don't take him. I don't know what I'll do with Penny. How will how will my daughter handle it? How can I help her? I don't, it's just beside myself. Please let him live. And as the 19 years have worn by, I said, God, I hope you didn't let him live for me. I hope you wanted him to live for this long for a reason, because now he's 19 and has not assimilated into society as an adult, isn't able to do the things that he wished he could do, and I lived with that anger and bargaining and some depression until I finally said, God, it's in your hands. So I think it's really important to hear people and have them share what they were bargaining with. What would you have done? What would happen? There's a young girl, 7 years old, that died of influenza B last year. And her mom bargained and bargained and bargained and bargained. And finally the doctor said, if she lives, she will lose both her legs and both her hands. And finally the mom said, I don't want that for her, and stopped bargaining. Most of the time in grief and death and dying, they then go into depression. And we just need to be available. We just need to be around the phone when that person is just at her wit's end and so down, so that we can answer the phone as she calls. Or I haven't heard from her. We visited on a Monday. It's a Thursday. I need to call her. I need to just pick up the phone and say, I'm feeling you in my heart today, and I wanted you to know that. How are you doing? If they need that spiritual support and that love and that acceptance when they're depressed. And then they move into acceptance, however long it takes. And we're just going to be there to support them through it. We're not going to withdraw from them because they've gotten through to that acceptance. However, they might withdraw from you, and you cannot take it personally. I helped a friend who was in the same church. I was a nurse. She was a teacher. Her husband was dying of cancer. And she would call me in the middle of the night he had bad dressings. Anyway, she called me in the middle of the night. And when he died, after the funeral, she wouldn't pick up my phone calls. She quit going to church. She didn't contact me. And so I was much younger at the time, and I went to the minister. We were Methodists then. And I said, I don't know what I did. And he said, you didn't do anything. You got to know her at her very deepest and intimate level. And now it's too hard to face you. You did what you needed to do. God was with you. Now you need to say, okay, and understand that she just cannot face you now. And it made a lot of sense. And it's helped me a lot over the years as I've been doing things with death and dying. I'm going to show you a video, maybe. I'm not going to show you this video. Laura, are you there in case I muck it up? Laura.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, can you, I'm going to stop sharing. Can you go to slide 16 and start the video for me? It won't open.
My name's Catherine Mannix, and in my humble opinion, dying's probably not as bad as you're expecting. We've stopped talking about dying. We've stopped mentioning the D words. Instead of saying dead, we say passed or passed away. Instead of saying dying, we might say seriously ill. And families don't understand that death is approaching when those words are used. And that is in fact a bit of a problem for us. And so now a family will sit around the bed of somebody so sick that they will be dying and not know what to say. Not know what to say to each other, not know what to say to the dying person. And the dying person doesn't know what to say either and doesn't know what to expect, wondering whether each breath might be their last breath. A scene of sadness and anxiety and despair. And in my humble opinion, it doesn't need to be like that at all. We've lost the rich wisdom of normal human dying, and it's time for us to talk about dying and reclaim the wisdom. What does normal dying look like? Well, dying like giving birth really is just a process. Gradually people become more tired, more weary. As time goes by, people sleep more and they're awake less. Families can learn when to give medicines and when to introduce visitors. But sometimes a visitor might happen or a medicine might be due during that sleep. And that's when we can discover that a change has taken place. It's tiny, but it's really significant. And it's that instead of just being asleep, this person has temporarily become unconscious. We can't wake them up. We can't give them that medicine. We can't tell them that that visitor is here. And yet when they waken later on, they tell us they've had a good sleep. So we know that this coma doesn't feel frightening, that lapsing into unconsciousness just isn't noticed by us when it happens. So as time goes by, people are awake less and asleep more, until eventually they're just unconscious all the time. We will be so relaxed that we won't bother to clear our throats. So maybe we'll be breathing in and out through little bits of mucus or saliva at the back of our throat. It can make a rattly, funny noise. People talk about the death rattle as though it's something terrible. But actually it tells me that my patient is so deeply relaxed, so deeply unconscious, that they're not even feeling that tickle of saliva as their air bubbles in and out through it from their lungs. So at the very end of somebody's life, there will be a period of shallow breathing and then one out breath that just isn't followed by another in breath. Sometimes it's so gentle that families don't even notice that it's happened. So normal human dying, just a really gentle process, something we can recognize, something we can prepare for, something we can manage. And this should be something we can celebrate. This is something we should be able to console each other with. But because it's become impolite to talk about dying, it's the really best kept secret in medicine. So, in my humble opinion, dying is something we should be reclaiming, we should be talking about, we should be consoling each other about. Please pass that on.
Thank you, Laura. I shared this film quickly because even though we're not talking about the dying process or the dying, you may visit dying friends or neighbors or parish members, or you may be in the hospital doing a visit when death occurs. And it shouldn't be something that's feared. It's beautiful. It's such a blessing to be with somebody when they leave this earth and go on to the bigger and better heaven above. It just, and I always say to the family, thank you so much for letting me be a part of this. I feel special. I've never been frightened of it. I've never felt it discouraging. It's just a very beautiful process. And one gentleman that I was with when he was dying, a couple days before he died, he said, well, tell me what it's going to be like. And I said, we all want to know. You know, we all wish somebody would just come back and tell us so that we could live the rest of our life with a little smile on our lips, knowing that it's going to be all right. And he said, but I'm so afraid of dying. I said, are you afraid to go to sleep at night? And he said, well, no. And I said, that's dying. And I said, and then I'm going to tell you something foolish. I don't take naps. To me, they're little snatches of death. Life is so very short. I want to live it to the fullest. So when I lay my head down to sleep at night, I have no fear. I'm too tired to have any fear, but I fear nothing. And most of us don't fear going to sleep at night, do we? That's death. It's just closing our eyes. And instead of waking up in the bedroom that you've been in for X number of years, you're waking up to a beauty that's so unimaginable. Our human mind cannot comprehend it. So I wanted you to know at this point in the juncture, just a little bit about what death is like. And everything she said is so very right and so very honest. And I think that if you are with a family and they're with their dying member, you just want to be there silently, quietly, offer a prayer if one's needed or ask for. Sometimes I'll say in the hospital, may I pray? If it's a non-Christian person, then I may wait until the end and say, may I give him a blessing? Would you mind if I gave him a blessing? So it's nothing to fear, and it's something that you're all going to come up against as pastoral caregivers at one time or another. I'm going to share my slides again. See if I can get my mouse to do what it's supposed to do. I'll touch the screen and that will stop that. So presence is central to the ministry of dying, right? So we have to become aware of our personal fears and feelings of dying before we can be present to somebody who is dying. To walk with them is an easy task if we have a tranquility and a peacefulness, or at least an understanding, a perception of what dying and death means to us. And being with that grieving and dying person actually brings you to a level, like I just said earlier, where you just feel like you stepped into the holy. And when you walk out of the room, you're kind of a different person. A little bit of you has changed. And I've never, ever, and I tell older folks this, the aging many times have a fear of dying. And it's not just that fear of being away from their family or friends or leaving their family and friends. It's that fear, what's going to happen? And I always say, I have been around children who knew they were dying of cancer or whatever the issue was, and they never feared it. They've never had a fear. And if you got on YouTube or any of the other places where you can look at videos and you've watched some of these families go through death with their youngsters, you'll see it. The parents have the fear. The child has none. God just protects little children, and they know they're going to go back to him. So we want to be with that grieving and the dying and bring them pastoral care that's at that different level, that isn't at a chatty level unless it needs to be, but is a level where that family or that dying person needs us to be. And believe me, you will know what it is when you stand at that bed or you sit next to that bed. You'll know what it is, because if you've prayed or prayed when you went in the door or prayed as you sat down, the Holy Spirit will be there and he will amaze you, or she, however you want to call her, him or her tonight. You will be amazed at what you're able to do and say through the Holy Spirit. But death is a very beautiful process. We know that the dying person needs to be free of pain. That's why I am really in love with palliative care and hospice. I don't know if anybody doesn't know about palliative care, but it's for people who have life-limiting diseases. And it starts when they're hospitalized. Usually those people have been hospitalized several times and will continue to be hospitalized. And the goal is to know them, know where they are in their disease process, and then help them through it. Make sure that they are sleeping well, that their bowels are moving, that they have proper nourishment and nutrition. And if it's not something that's in their diet, well, then we will, not me, not the chaplain, but the physician or the physician's assistant will change their diet. You know, if somebody is at the end of life and they're diabetic, it doesn't matter if they're diabetic. If they want a bowl of ice cream and it sounds good to them and they know they're going to eat it, give them that bowl of ice cream. And not us as the pastoral caregiver, but we can certainly smile and say, you know, when they say, what do you think? You know, I think that might be a good idea. If I were dying and ice cream was my favorite, I'd want you to give it to me. So, you know, we're there to help that family member as well. They want to know that there's gratitude for their lives and what they've experienced in their life. You know, it's about their legacy. Down on the third or fourth bullet or the lower bullet, it's about what they contributed in their lifetime. People as they're dying, not as actively dying, but are dying, because there's a difference. Dying is you have pancreatic cancer and you've done all the treatments you can do, and they've said there's nothing more we can do. You know, you've got maybe 2 weeks, maybe 4 months, but there's nothing more. And the doctors will say this, get your things together, get your legal things together and enjoy your family. But they also want to know what their legacy is. What are they leaving behind? When I'm gone, what's going to be there that is me? What have I done in my lifetime? What have I contributed? And as a pastoral caregiver, if you know that person, that's the time that you can share those things. Oh my gosh, what you did on the altar, what you do and have always done on the altar guild is a gift God gave you. I mean, our altar was always beautiful because of you. Everything was just perfect. Neither the priest nor the deacon could make any changes because you said it so perfectly. That's telling them they contributed to somebody. They contributed to something. They have a legacy. And we need to talk, and that's showing them pride in their accomplishments. That's showing them that you remember those great things they did. And you know what? Even as the person in the church, you know, there's always somebody in some church or some organization that just kind of makes the hair on the back of your head stand up. And she or he is always kind of in the thicket causing trouble. Even that person, you will be able to find something special to tell him or her about her life that's made a difference to somebody else, that's brought happiness to somebody. They want to know that they were loved and that they're being loved as they're dying. So now we're done with dying and death and that kind of grief. Now we're going to talk about meeting the needs of seniors. But you know what? It falls right in from one to the other. If I were writing an essay, where I used to be teach college English, I would say, well, you know, you can't just go from one thing and jump out of it and jump into something entirely new, but you can on PowerPoint. And we didn't really go completely out of it because what are seniors meeting as they age? They're getting closer to their death and they're dying. So what are the needs of the seniors? Where, you know, the Psalm says, and now that I'm old and gray-headed, do not forsake me till I make known your strength to the next generation and your power to all who are to come. In actuality, you probably have already made known your strength to the next generation and your children and grandchildren and great grandchildren. And hopefully you've talked to those people about your love of God. So some of the transitions and challenges of aging are finding meaning, social isolation, retirement, aging and poverty, caregiving, ageism. We talk about all the isms in our world, and especially in the terms of social justice. Well, ageism, aging, seniors is part of that. Many seniors are discriminated against because of their age. We just are. It's just part of what life carries for us. But these are all challenges that the aging face that we can help them with. Ageism, prejudice and discrimination, blatant ageism. I worked in an office in the chief of naval personnel where it was blatant ageism. Joan, you don't dress sexy enough. Nobody's going to listen to your PowerPoints if you go dressed like in clothes 2 sizes too large for you. Well, I don't like tight clothes, so I wasn't going to change. Then they were trying to make me do something that had no ability to do. Like, it wasn't a skill I could learn because I didn't have an ability to do it at all. So they were taking me, this round peg, and trying to fit me in square holes. And in actuality, they wanted me gone because I was in my late 50s and the team was a very young team. And they didn't like the history I was trying to bring forth, the things that had happened in the past. It was blatant ageism. But then there's also some subtle signs of ageism that we all face as we age. And then there's also ways that culture perpetuates stereotypes and even the negative images and jokes. I don't know if you're on social media, but on social media, old women are just lots. And I sometimes pass those along as well because I think, oh, that's me. But you have to laugh a little bit about it. But not everybody likes to. So aging gracefully is what we can help with. And we can help them. There are so many things that we can share with our folks that are home and not able to do what they used to do in volunteering. Maybe they used to go to the church all the time and help with the suppers and help with Sunday school, and they can't drive anymore, or they have Parkinson's and they just they don't have that mobility once somebody drives them there. So the social part of church has kind of gone away for them. Well, there are other things they can do. We have card ministries and we have prayer chains and we have all these things that you can do from your house. So we need to think of those things when we are with somebody that's aging and they're feeling depressed and socially expelled, and try to figure out what might be something that they could do. They could enhance their spirituality by books or books on tapes. There's things that you can do for church that don't have to be done in the church. They can reach out. So many in the pandemic. I don't know how many of you were doing pastoral care during the pandemic, but it was brutal because you would call many of the older folks, and I'm in that category. It's always so hard for me to say the older folks when I'm in that same category, but they either did not want to talk, or they would tell you everything was all right and you knew it wasn't all right, or they would talk and 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 talk, and you'd end the conversation, give her whatever, talk after you've listened, say, this is what I think I've heard. How about trying books on tape? You can get them free from the library. And, if you don't have internet access, I can go to the library and get them, or I can get the books and get them to you somehow. But then that sort of turns them off. Sometimes they just got to talk about it. They don't want your suggestions or your ideas on how to age gratefully. So it's something that we have to work on with love and empathy. But we also have to remind that at every age, a happy life is made up of the little things, right? An ice cream cone with a young grandchild, seeing a brand new baby. There's so many things that can bring joy to lives. Social isolation is a big one, for many, many reasons. For illness, for you can't drive anymore. The pandemic was a big social isolation. And but even without the pandemic, it's a very common thing for elderly people, because as we age and our minds are not as clear as they are, they don't like to wait for us to find the right word, or they want to answer our words for us, even though they don't know what I'm going to say. And so isolation sometimes is self-isolation, and isolation sometimes is brought on because others just don't want to talk anymore to you. Oh, Grandma, you've said that over and over and over again. You tell me every time I see you, well, it's all right. I love you. And you don't mind me saying that over and over again. Just remember, I'm not young anymore. After retirement, there's often that limited mobility and negativity that comes. And for many people, retirement brought enough to live by, but as they age, some people age out of their retirement and end up living only on Social Security. So there's often financial issues that are very hard, and also distance them socially because they can't go out to lunch or dinner anymore with their friends. The death of significant others, loneliness, lack of spiritual support. I have a dear, dear friend who turned 87 years old on Sunday, yesterday, and she has Parkinson's and some other comorbidities with it, and lots of depression. And the priest at her church has not yet brought her communion, not even to the porch, or called her, or sent anybody to talk to her. And this is a very giving, a very full and loving church that this person goes to. But she just kind of got lost in the shuffle because it's an aging church. Our Episcopal churches are aging churches, and there's so much need that my friend just kind of got left out. So I picked it up. She's my friend and I don't have any problem going to see her. So sometimes the pastoral caregiver is the one that needs to help with that spirituality, with that lack of closeness with their church. And you can do that by bringing the bulletin to them. If you go to the same church, by bringing the devotional that the church has in the front at the beginning of every month, or at sharing anything that's happening at church with them helps. Is also like with my friend, her husband is going to turn 90 on June 25th. And he's now with a walker and not able to drive. So that brings on more social isolation. The good thing that's come out of this particular family is a family that was sort of separated by distance, who now sees their mom and dad closing in on the end of their life, has become much more supportive, which often happens. And it's that spiritual wellness is just as important as when you're going to church as it is when you're not going to church. There's grateful. So let's talk about graceful aging, reaching out to that inner self. How do we move from solitude and loneliness to peace? How do we help them reach that? Is it just about praying for a deeper intimacy with God? I think everybody, if you get a chance, I don't know if you have chances in your life to read, but Henry Nouwen's book, Reaching Out, is excellent for all of us as we age. It is a great book, and it's a book that you can get on tape, and it would be one that you could download on a phone. Although some older people don't have phones, but even having that available to have people borrow and larger print is helpful, and it helps them see that they're not different, that how they're feeling, what's going on in their life. That social isolation is probably in many, many, many others' lives as well. It's just not me. You don't get that woe is me type of thing. They love to reminisce, and we should invite them to share those pearls of their life and ask just the right question so that they have to dig a little deeper and polish that pearl a little shinier. And I'm telling you, once you start, sometimes you can't stop them. They just, and when they're doing it, their face lifts, their eyes get brighter. You have provided them a day of excitement and joy because you allowed them to bring up those special times in their lives or those stories that are important to them. And it also helps them look at any unfinished business they may be facing now they're ending near the end of their life. Maybe it's a son that is sort of estranged from you, and in their stories they share some of that, and so listening and using good open-ended questions may help them figure out how they can reach back out to that estranged person. And it also provides them kind of a sense of accomplishment when they're talking about all those things they did when they were young and what they meant to them. Then we need to help them prepare for death. How do you do that? Most of the time we avoid it, don't we? My friend that I was just talking about to you, I don't avoid it with her. And she tells me, you're the only one that will be honest with me. And I said, no, everybody will be honest with you. They won't be just as honest with you because it's too hard. One thing came up, her Parkinson's was causing her mobility to decrease to almost nothing. And then she had pain in her back that was just horrible. And she had the opportunity to get a treatment that would help the pain, but it was going to be put internally, and she didn't want that put in. That frightened her. And we went through this and through this and through this for weeks. And finally I said, I do understand, but it's your choice. And I think if you thought about it, you have the two choices that you have is one, not to have it done and continue to be in this agonizing pain where you cannot do anything. And two, get it done because they actually put it on outside and had her wear it and she got improvement and feel better. Two choices, and you only have to pick one. But if you pick the one that doesn't take away your pain, then like we've talked over the years, her and I, about your children have to face the consequences of their choices, then you have to face the consequence of that choice and your pain won't go away. But we have to help them with that. And we have to say, this particular couple, I spent 3 months trying to get them to do their living will, how they wanted to be treated at the end. If one of them had a heart attack, did they want CPR? Did they want to be put on life support? They would not discuss it. And then all of a sudden, it's been several years now, they've discussed it and we've went over it a couple more times and it's become easier. But those are all things that we can do to help with that reminiscing. And we talked about this really, life review, finishing work helps prepare for your death. What do you feel like isn't finished in your life? What do you wish you had more time to do? And that's a good question. What do you wish you had more time to do now that you know you're coming towards the end? And then you can have that loving conversation that helps ease the fears of that person. And then you can listen with your heart on how they view death and how they view their death and what they think about the transition. And it is not ours to judge what they say. It's ours to listen and with a loving heart and be there to continue to share until they work out the things that need to be worked out about their death. The spirituality of seniors can become a catalyst for change and healing. because they live in the present and they can take time to be silent and meditate. Do they do that? Not very often. Not the seniors that I work with. But it should help them relinquish that need for external approval and anger from old hurts, and shed that burden of judgment, and replace that fear motivated behavior with love motivated behavior. And that's when we need to share our wisdom. In other words, all this person does is talk about how hateful her brother was to her, and her father never liked her, and yada, yada, yada. And her whole life is all because of this. Everything that's happened to her is because of this. Well, have you tried meditating about it? Have you really, if you don't want to do that quietly, then take a piece of paper and a pen and have 2 columns. And this is what makes you angry or hurt you. And this was what would make it easier, would help you reclaim your joy, because you've told me in the past you have some joyful memories of that brother. But doing so helps them relinquish, hopefully, those old hurts and that fear or burden of judgment, and brings them more alive spiritually. I've asked good friends, would you like to read the Bible with me? No, I don't need to read the Bible with you. Okay, I'm just checking. But if you do, where, just call me. We'll do it, even over the phone. How about a prayer? I have one friend some friends I can pray over the phone for when they're having a problem, and I'll say, well, let's pray now. And other friends, I don't even say that, because I know that's not where they are and that doesn't make them comfortable. But you want to share your wisdom when you can. And here's just a few leading questions. There's another handout on the toolkit that will help you with the elderly as well. But what's beauty to you? And, that person may say, huh? What do you mean, what's beauty? Well, what does the word beauty mean to you? Well, what's that mean to you? Well, then you share yours. Beauty is that first early morning hour when you can see the dew hanging on the blades of grass and the sun's just starting to peek up over the horizon. And, so you give them some examples and then they can give you some examples. How do you feel about yourself? Well, I feel pretty crappy. I'm so sorry to hear that. You have given so much over the years and you are such a beautiful person. Let's talk about that. What are you afraid of? Well, I'm afraid of dying, aren't you? Well, I used to be. When my children were young, I think I was always fearful of dying young and then them being raised without their mom. Not anymore. And sometimes when you say, no, I'm not afraid of dying, well, you must be a fool then. They want to hear what you really mean. Were you never afraid of dying? Are you just afraid now? These kind of questions bring other questions out and conversations out that are very, very helpful. And where is God in your life? I said that to my mom when she was dying. Mom, where's God in your life? And she said, oh, Joan, I believe in God. I still tell you you're the milkman. You've always been the one who always wanted to go to church. But I believe in God and I believe in heaven, so don't worry about me. So that was the end of the conversation with my mom, but I asked her that question and I got an answer. So be conscious of what you ask and how you ask it, but make sure they're open-ended questions. The third thing we've got time to do tonight is self-care. So we talked about caring for the deaf and the dying. We caring about people who are ill. We sort of run the gamut, but we haven't talked about ourselves. Because as pastoral caregivers, what you see when you visit can weigh heavily on you. And so you need to take care of yourself as well. And it's not a selfish act. It's a good stewardship of the gift that God gave you. As a pastoral caregiver, as somebody who truly feels called to go out and be with people in the worst times of their life, when they're ill, when they're lonely, most of the time when you wouldn't want to be around people, but it's in your heart to do it, then that's the gift God's given you. And in Parker Palmer's book, Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation, it's a very thin book, and I've done several book studies on it in different churches. It's marvelous because he was, I won't tell you anything about him because the book kind of shares all that. But he believes, like I believe, that we are all given a gift, a gift, an ability that's ours. It's not something we can learn. It's there. Mine has always been being with people, call it pastoral care. Now, when I was a kid in high school, I was always called Mom. The boys would ask me out on a date to get the other girl to go out on a date. Well, how do I get Susie Q to go on a date with me? So, I believe that that's sort of where God gave me what I needed to do in my lifetime for him. So if you get a chance to read Parker Palmer's Let Your Life Speak, and remember, I'll put this up at the end of the class tonight. It is a good book, and it's a short read. You can read it very quickly. So there are types of self-care. We all know that. This is not new to anybody. Physical, emotional, social, spiritual, and we all know what it says below them. We all know we need to have good sleep. We all know we need to be having some sort of exercise in our day, even if it's just a short walk. We need to have some physical release. We need healthy food. Do we have all of that? Do we do all of that? I don't. I mean, I do. I walk 2.5 to 3 miles a day, 6 days a week with my husband. So we do that. Do I stretch? Never. Do I sleep? Most of the time I sleep well. Do I have a physical release? I don't know. Do I eat healthy? Heck no. I like diet cherry Pepsi, and I love chocolate. So those are bad. I need to work on that. But emotional is about stress management, emotional maturity, forgiveness, compassion, all those things that we know in our daily life as Christians we're supposed to be doing. But God gave us free will, and so sometimes we don't do that so well. As pastoral caregivers, you need to do this. You need to find that physical, emotional, social, and spiritual part of your life that will give you rest and relaxation, and bring you back to fullness before you go out to that next visit, which may be a harder visit than the first one. Social boundaries, support systems, positive social media. Social media is a downer. I keep threatening to come off of Facebook, but it's the only way I see the school kids that I grew up with from years ago, and I really enjoy chatting with them on Facebook. So I go off, then I go back on. So those under social, and then spiritual. Sometimes we think because we're pastoral caregivers and we have that heart for it, and we go to church every Sunday, that we're spiritual. Are we really? Are we really, really spiritual? Do we have a sacred space? Do we have a rule of life? Do we pray regularly? Those are all things that we need to think about for our self-care, so that we can be there for those who need us. This is just some principles of self-care. I'm not going to read them all because we sort of talked about them. But one, be flexible, and not a time to be perfect, but pliant are two big ones, because you need to be flexible in timing. You may have set a time to go visit and you arranged everything around it for your schedule, and then you get a call and the person's not feeling well, or or somebody's come to visit, or it's not a good time. So we have to be a little bit flexible. As a pastoral care person, it's not a time to be perfect, but pliant. We've got to be able to mold to where we need to be for that person, where they are. And we have to find the holy wherever we are and whoever we are. Because if we can't do that, then we're not going to be much good in helping others find the holy where they are. Here's some final tidbits for you. You're responsible for your task, right? God's responsible for the outcome. How many believe that? How many really, really believe that? If you're like me, I give it to him. God, I can't do this. I'm giving it to you and placing it in your hands. I will continue to pray about it, but I will not worry about it. And like 2 hours later, I'm thinking, wait a minute, God, I don't hear anything. I don't feel anything yet. I'm taking it back. I mean, I really have to work at that. The need will always be greater than the resources. Just is what it is. You're always going to need more than you have. Use care in how you measure your success as a pastoral caregiver. Your success is not about the number of people you see or the number of people you've gotten back in church, or, I'm not sure there is a measure of success in being a pastoral caregiver. Being invited back, I guess, would be a measure of a success, or being asked to see somebody. Value small victories. If you go in to see somebody and you only feel like you did one thing that was helpful to that person in that time you were with them, hallelujah. Value it as a small victory. Who you are is as important as what you do. I am kind of I don't know what you call me, but a priest that I served under said to me one day, I love your pastoral caregiving. She said, you know how to just bring enough humor into it to put the person at ease so that they can talk to you. I'm not one that, maybe it's because I don't take myself very seriously, or I don't think I don't know, but I want them to feel like I'm happy to be there and I really want to hear their story. And it's like all of you that are here tonight. I really, really am excited that you have stuck with me through these 6 weeks. And I, every time we've gotten online, I've been so excited about it and happy to be able to share what I know and what I've learned in the classes I've been in. So it's important that you're who you are. Don't change. Their pain is not your pain. Years ago, that was not an easy task for me. Your pain was my pain. It just was when I was younger. And so you have to learn that their pain isn't your pain. And you just have to be able to take it out and put it at the doorstep and shut the door from that visit and walk away. You can't take it home with you. And so you have to remember to care for yourself so that you have something left to give. That's so important. Remember, self-care is never a selfish act. It's simply good stewardship. It's the only gift I have, the gift I was put on earth to offer to others. It's another quote from Parker Palmer. I mean, he is a very, very great writer, and I think he has great, now you may read it and not quite agree, but I'm going to stop my share. We're done for what I have to share with you, but I wanted to have some time left tonight so that we could open the floor up to questions, comments, concerns. I also want to suggest that you continue to watch the school's website because they are offering classes throughout the summer. And when they offer the class that I think it was on death and dying, or it was about death and dying, if you get a chance, take it. You can never hear too much from different people about death and dying and the process, and how handling that process as an individual and will help you handle that process when you're doing pastoral care. So I encourage you to keep watching for classes that you can take online, especially now that they're online and you can sit in your own house with your sweatpants on and your treats beside you. You don't have to go anywhere or get gas in your car. It's a great time to learn. And we're going to continue to do these kind of classes online for a long time to come. So I encourage you to do that. So how about comments and questions? Any questions from tonight's lecture? Not a lecture, that wasn't the right word. Slide sounds better. Oh, come on, you guys are too easy. Who has really looked and thought about their own death?
Oh, I have. I have a question about well, a situation that I have that a neighbor, the husband died, and it was very traumatic. And so there's not just, well, it's the grief, but it's the deep grief on top of the trauma. And so I've been listening and following with her, but I know underlying that is trauma, and she's not wanting to go. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And I've said, have you thought about, but she won't, she hasn't moved to support.
So you have suggested some places that offer guidance or some
Yes,
classes.
there is a hospice and that provides grief and bereavement support, and she's pretty well. She's not trusting in any support. She has some friends that she talks to on the phone, and she trusts to talk with me. I know there's financial difficulties, but she has someone who is walking through all the paperwork and that. So she's got some supports, but she's focused on dealing with the grief and what is coming out in the trauma.
When did he die? Did you tell me and I lost it already? How long has she been a widow?
It's 2 months now.
So she's very, very early in her grief.
Yeah.
This is the time where they often don't, they don't want to see a counselor. They don't want to go to a group. They're just not ready because they're still at that stage so maybe what you're offering is the best. I'm sorry.
Sorry, 3 months. Yeah, but you're right. Yeah.
So I think you're doing the right thing, Julie. You're visiting her. You're sitting down and letting her share what she's feeling. And I know what you're seeing. If she's got somebody help, she has no family, like children.
Her children's not in the same. Her child's not in the same community. And her grown child is not in the same community, and my concern is just that she's not. I mean, it is early in the grief, but she's not eating well. She's not sleeping well. She's reluctant.
Typical.
Yeah, which is typical. Yeah.
That's very typical. And it's good for you, as since you're trying to be a pastoral caregiver to her, is to get online and read some of the grief articles on hospice. They give you some really good information on how to deal with things like that. And some of the things we talked about tonight, but I think don't expect too much. I mean, and she may get to the point where her depression is overwhelming to her and you, and that's when you watch for signs that it's going a little too deep. But I think you just have to be there. You have to be a presence for her right now. And is she religious? Does she have a church?
No, she won't go to church. She did have a church, but right now she doesn't trust anybody.
Here's another idea. When we're trying to help a family cope with death and dying, as a death doula, we like to work on the legacy. And so why don't you start talking about her husband and what was his legacy? What did he leave behind for her? And ask her to show you one of her favorite albums, photo albums with him in it, and get her to talking about, even if they make her sadder to start with. she has to bring up those things, those memories, but build a legacy of her husband with her. Give her something else to think about, that maybe once you go, gee, she's got these photo albums out and she remembers she shared this story and this story, and you can give her some activities to kind of do during the, well, how about if you gathered all of your photos when your child was younger, your daughter or son was younger? Start working on a legacy with her and see if that helps her bring her mind around to the present and work a little bit through that grief. But I wouldn't worry too much. She's just at the very hard spot of her grief.
Yeah.
I hope that helps.
Oh, it does. Yeah, very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.
Yeah.
Sue?
When she's past that first really hard stage, there is a program called Walking the Mourner's Path. It is not a grief counseling group, but it is a group of Christians, and the only place I have seen it is in the Episcopal Church, where they build the legacy, as you called it, Joan, of the person they are mourning. You build quote, a standing stone, like the early Hebrews did, to mark important places and events. But for the average woman, according to the group that I participated in and then took the facilitator's course with, it's probably 6, 8, 9 months before a newly grieving person is ready for that woman. Men, a little bit shorter. But this is another place for folks to start helping other people to look towards, I guess, healing, getting through the grieving process, the mourning process, and to the other side, to the joyous remembrance of who that loved one was.
Absolutely. And if you have the opportunity and you're there during the dying process of that person's spouse, it's a great time to start working on a legacy, and you will be really surprised the number of dying people that want to do that, because they feel they have left nothing behind, that they don't have a legacy. And many families will then work on that legacy after. In fact, that has kept many people, spouses, left behind with a project that was started with that person that they so loved, and they want to keep moving on it. So, and there's all sorts of, I'm not telling you need to take a course on death and dying by any means, but there's some really good things on the internet about all of this, if you're interested in looking up some of that stuff. So thanks, Sue. That was a great input. Thank you. Any other questions before we think about leaving? Gee, I might get you out early. The last class, and she finally lets me leave early. Cecily, you got it. You're muted.
It's interesting when you were talking about writing your own obituary, because I had been thinking about my obituary not too long ago as to how I would like to see it. If I were to read my obituary in the newspaper, how would I like to see it written? And so I've been thinking about it recently, and I'm going to sit down and write my obituary and actually put it in a file folder. So I would have it written as I would like to have it in the newspaper. Yeah, I've been thinking about it. Death is not something I'm really afraid of.
Cecily, now you can do it, because I gave you the means to write one in the toolkit.
Yes.
So don't forget to go in the toolkit and grab those things, print them up, or put them on your library and your internet, your desktop, or wherever you keep things. Any other comments before we, Carolyn?
Thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
Thank you. I wanted to say thank you, Joan, and thank you very much for taking the time and the patience and all the love that you've shared over these 6 weeks. I've learned a lot, and I think everybody else has too. So thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to just, good. I wanted to piggyback on Julie's question in that, so at what point do you feel you, when you get shunned or you're sort of pushed away by someone that you're, caring for or want to care for, how do you balance the please, go away with, okay, it's been a week, I'm going to circle back and just see how that's going. I mean, do you have any advice on that?
I always am very upfront. I'm like a bad penny. I'm going to show up again. I want to be a part of what you're going through. I want to be there for you. I won't bug you, but I know that I'm going to be calling you. If I haven't heard from you, I'm going to be calling you every week. You don't have to talk to me long. I'm just checking in. Maybe there's something on your mind you want to talk about and we can set up a time to get together. But I always tell them, if it's a hospital visit, it's easy because, you only have so much time. But if you're pastoral visiting in a home, and this pastoral visiting, the way we're talking about it here, is not like the Stevens ministry. Who's a Stevens minister? I think we have some on here. Tell me if I'm wrong, Seppi, but Stevens ministers usually take a person on, but they stay with that person, right?
Yes, we go through the whole process. Whatever the issue is, defining it, they come to the parish, to the clergy suggests it, and then the clergy sends us. And we try to define it and then work through the process. It could take 2 months, it could take a year or more.
Right. And so with pastoral,
one thing we do have though are monthly meetings in which we are able, not necessarily, we don't share the confidential stuff, but what's going on in us.
We didn't talk about, right, and we thank you, Seppi, and we didn't talk about debriefing, which is a really important part of pastoral care. In the COE, the Community of Hope International pastoral care program. In fact, there was a Circle of Care meeting tonight that the priest at our church ran, and because I was doing this still, we meet every month, the third Monday of the month, and it's just a time for all of us to get together and debrief. There are no names used, but somebody may have had a phone visit because we've been in the pandemic. That was difficult. Or maybe because we're not visiting in person, we haven't had a whole lot to debrief about. So we'll have a training, each person takes a turn facilitating and hosting it, or facilitating it and doing a training. And if you have a pastoral care team in your church, you should meet. If not every month, at least once a quarter, you should meet, because you need to be able to have that team, that core team, going out and doing the same, being trained the same way, being able to talk to each other. You also should have the support of your parish priest or pastor, so that if you have a difficult visit, you have somebody to go to. And sometimes you just need to go to that person and say, I think I goofed. Or I don't know what to do. I made this lady so mad. She couldn't wait for me to leave. You need that. You need that in this type of ministry. So yes, if you have a parish pastoral care ministry, you need to have some sort of a gathering or time with the priest so that you can debrief. Beth has a question. We got to go in a minute. Beth, you got time to, Beth? You got to unmute.
We have about three or four people waiting to ask questions. So I just wanted to ask if we want to hold questions and close with prayer, and those people who need to go, and those who still have questions stay, or if everybody just wants to stay.
Could I just please say, I want to ask how things turned out last week. You had a critical situation at the beginning of the meeting, and I've thought about it all week, and I just want to know if everything turned out okay and your relative.
Thank you. My son-in-law was fine and got home like at 2 o'clock in the morning. And 2 days later, we had another barricade situation. So it's terrible here for some reason. And the 2 police officers, the 2 sheriffs that were shot were upgraded from critical to serious. Although one is probably never going to be a county sheriff again. So, and the young man that was the shooter was a young 28, and he died during the conflict. I'm not sure how, whether it was self-inflicted or from the sheriffs, but thanks for asking that. That was a tough night.
So your son-in-law is okay?
He's fine. Thank you so much.
I'm grateful. And I just wish that we could, I feel like we just barely touched on a lot of these things, and I would love to see something continue.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, let's go to the prayer. Thanks, Beth. Eve?
Oh, I was just going to recommend this little book. It's called May I Walk You Home if you have to deal with death and dying. It was a tremendous assistance to me when I walked a friend home. She was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and gone in 2 weeks.
Will you share that, the name of the book and the author, on chat while we are doing our final prayer, Eve? So
Sure.
Anybody can cut and paste it. It is 8:01. My thing just said 8. Laura, can you take us to prayer?
Okay, let's compose ourselves.